Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. You know, this right here, what I'm about to show you guys, is why they hate Joe Rogan so much. It's actually very simple. It's mostly due to the fact that Joe Rogan is actually willing to have a real conversation. You know, the left keeps crying, why don't we have our own Joe Rogan? And well, the answer is actually very simple, because you guys could never have these types of conversations. Your precious built narratives are too delicate and must be protected, and so you can't have Joe Rogan. You cannot have honest conversations like this, where the precious narrative that you built is attacked and essentially crumbles before our very eyes with the lightest of questioning and scrutiny. This is why they hate him so much. This is why Kamala Harris refused to show up on Joe Rogan's podcast. Let me show you guys exactly what's happening. As Joe Rogan takes on the January 6th narrative, we got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Alright folks, so I got an interesting segment I want to show you guys. Let's just say this is how real people are talking about January 6th. You know, kind of a far cry from the conversation that you see from most of the talking heads occupying most of the discussion panels in the mainstream media.
Yeah.
You got a friend who was a January 6th guy?
Well, he's still there. He's like hundreds of days in jail without any kind of without trial.
Without process.
Yeah. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but like that's not how it's supposed to be, is it?
It's not how it's supposed to be.
You're supposed to have a due process of some kind.
Well, especially when you watch the actual footage of how it went down.
Oh, I watched it live. Cops were waving people in. They were opening the doors for people.
I want you to think about it this way. In the most heavily armed nation the world has ever known, why would you have an insurrection with no guns?
Yeah, you got to have guns. Machine guns.
Those guys weren't planning on an insurrection.
No.
And then you have the factor that there was agents in the crowd, and we don't know how many. There's government agents in the crowd that were inciting people to go in.
Yeah.
That's what they do. But this guy who was a cop, it was not by the protesters. And you watch the video of the shaman dude with the fucking buffalo hat. They're walking him around. The cops are guiding
they're showing him around. No,
they're guiding him. How would you ever think that that is going to let you wind up in jail? Yeah, you don't do an insurrection without weapons. The whole idea is crazy. Certainly to go into the Capitol was a bad decision to smash windows, but I want to know who was
People
doing
had been smashing things like for a whole year before that.
Right. That's a very good point.
It's like we were a culture of smashing things at that point.
It's also as soon as you find out that there were government agents that may or may not have incited people to go in, the whole thing changes. Like, what are you trying to do? Are you there to serve and protect, or is there some other weird going on? Because it seems like there is, and no one wants to talk about it because you don't want to be that guy. But at a certain point in time, you should be that guy. You should go, what's going on, man? Trump getting into office, because he said one of the first things he said was he was going to release all the January 6th prisoners. Like, how long do you think they should be in there for? Who's opposing this?
Yep, they pretty much hit the frickin' nail on the head. You know, you got those in the media who are pushing the deep state angle, that all these January 6ers are a bunch of insurrectionists who basically had it coming. You know, lock them up and throw away the key kind of thing. And you got the rest of us actually having an honest conversation about what happened on that day. You know, that right there is the beauty of Joe Rogan. He's actually asking the questions that curious, honest people tend to. You know, the exact questions that the deep statists don't want you to ask. What they want you to do is just buy the narrative hook, line, and sinker, shut up and accept it. January 6th was an insurrection, okay, buddy? Now shut up and let us weaponize the justice system. That's what they're looking for. But regular, honest people don't just give in to narratives, at least not that easily, and people are asking themselves very important questions. And I think Joe Rogan brought up a great question. If this truly was an insurrection, where were the guns? I mean, historically, insurrection involved weapons, right? Military strategy? I mean, we're talking about a militant, by-force overtake of government. But on January 6th, did we see that? No, of course not. What we saw was a protest that spiraled out of control. People walked in the Capitol, many not even realizing that they were trespassing, and yet the media and Nancy Pelosi ran with the insurrection narrative to push their political agenda, and they essentially used these people like pawns in their great political plan. And really, the more we analyze January 6th as an event, the more questions I have and the more peculiar it all seems. I mean, let's not forget Nancy Pelosi's involvement here. She had total oversight on Capitol security, yet she repeatedly refused to bolster protection before the event, despite all the intelligence suggesting that it was going to be a big, probably out of control event. But what did Nancy do on that day? Not only did she reject calls for more security and reject a request to send National Guard troops, but she also showed up with a documentary camera crew. The media thinks you're crazy to question any of this. The media thinks you're crazy to even suggest that there was a plot here to entrap Americans. But I think to most people analyzing this, to most people having that honest conversation, It seems like that's exactly what happened. And then that brings us into the next part that Joe Rogan mentioned, the possibility of agent involvement. He mentions that it's possible there were agitators in the crowd. Ooh, what a deranged, kooky conspiracy theorist, right? These are the questions you're not supposed to be asking. But they're the exact questions we're all asking. And of course, to pretty much nobody's surprise, I guess we're not that crazy after all.
The report reveals that there were a total of 26 confidential human sources in the crowd that day.
David Spunt is live from the Justice Department. He has got the news for us. David.
Sandra, 3 of those were authorized and tasked by the FBI to be there on January 6, 2021. We're coming up on 4 years since that day of the Capitol riot. This IG report specifically focuses on the FBI's handling of confidential human sources, or as we know them, FBI informants. For years, the outgoing FBI director, Chris Wray, has been pressed on reports of undercover agents. According to this new report, there were no undercover FBI agents. However, there were 3 confidential human sources tasked by the Bureau to be in the crowd on January 6th to specifically watch what the report states is concerns over domestic terrorism. And what stands out in this report, John and Sandra, none of the confidential human sources that enter the U.S. Capitol or a restricted area were prosecuted by the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. Remember, this is an office that is still arresting nearly 4 years later and prosecuting people with this case. Now, in a response to the Inspector General, the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office says the following. The D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office generally has not charged those individuals whose only crime on January 6, 2021 was to enter the restricted grounds surrounding the Capitol, which has resulted in the office declining to charge hundreds of individuals, and we have treated the confidential human sources as consistent with this approach. Confidential human sources tasked by the FBI are not undercover agents. These are people that belong to groups like, for instance, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and then became paid FBI informants at certain points in time while still being members of their groups. And of course, John and Sandra, others are not part of any group and just decided to show up to the Capitol for whatever reason and still work with the FBI on the side and provide information.
An Inspector General report now uncovers that the FBI deployed 26 confidential sources during the January 6th events, with some of them even entering the Capitol. Womp womp womp. Well, would you look at that? Seems like the truth about January 6th is finally, slowly coming to light, and the Democrat narrative has crumbled. This was a protest. Sure, a chaotic one, but it definitely wasn't an insurrection. The narrative is crumbling and people are seeing through the lies, and people are asking the right questions, and the most popular podcast host is exposing the facts for everybody to see. And all of this is happening as the mainstream media is attacking Donald Trump for supposedly being so extreme with his promise to investigate some of these cases. But there's nothing extreme about it. You've got hundreds of J6 defendants who remain in prison under extreme conditions. Some of them are suffering psychological torture. We've seen stories of some of these individuals sitting in solitary confinement for months. And we're talking about people with no prior record, many of whom didn't commit any violent acts on the day. And so maybe it's time we start having an honest conversation about the actual facts and what actually happened, instead of allowing the left to simply browbeat their narrative into the public consciousness with their extreme intimidation tactics. This narrative is crumbling beyond belief, and good on Joe Rogan for having an honest conversation. No wonder the Democrat establishment despises him so much. No wonder Kamala Harris and her pathetic little campaign decided to skip Joe Rogan. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys on this one. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.